Okay, the title of this video is gonna be, was MH370 AWAXED? Because from all the evidence that I've been able to see, that's precisely what happened, is that the United States has modified their radars to be able to create action at a distance. So what I'd first like to say in this video is there's a lot of people that are not wanting me to say all the stuff that I'm saying, especially in this video right here. The last video I just uploaded was from about 8:30 last night. I was about 10 minutes into recording the video that you're about to see right now. I had a Black Hawk do a flyby here, and the timing was super significant because the night before I actually uploaded this video that you're gonna see the night before, but I didn't publish it. So they knew exactly what I was gonna say. So when I started recording last night, they made their presence known. This is exposing a lot of stuff that people do not want out there. I'm risking a lot what I'm doing, and other people are as well. So with that being said, we've got them exactly where we want them, and that was just further proof. So in regards to the MH370 investigation that Ashton Forbes is doing, he got into all the Tom Bearden stuff from the 1980s dealing with scalar interferometry. And I think that explains everything. And I believe I can prove that that's how they're actually possibly creating the orbs. So in this video, I'd like to run through all this stuff and thank Tom Bearden, because a little over 2 weeks ago, I asked Tom Bearden for any help that he could give from beyond in regards to helping solve this whole MH370 deal, and he guided me to something that I was thinking about, and he told me to go back to it. So what had happened is, in the letter to Ashton Forbes, there was a part where it's talking about there's a deeper layer and to look for the technology. So that's exactly what I got led to in this whole thing, is the technology. And it's literally called AU Gold. That's their symbol on it is AU, and you're gonna see why it's so highly valued. So I also recently heard some stuff again from Pete Peterson, and he's corroborating this whole thing, and it all makes sense. So let's get into this. Stay with me. There's a lot to go over here, and here we go. Okay, so when I asked Tom Bearden for any clues he could give me, he told me to go back to what I was originally thinking. This is a model, the same model that I had of a boombox back when I was in first grade in 1985. I always thought that the megahertz thing was really cool looking on there for some reason. So I kept thinking about this whole thing with MH370 and the numbers and the letters. And when you actually put MH370 into a search, you'll just get stuff about the plane. But if you go on Yahoo and you type in 370 megahertz, that opens all kinds of doors. So that's exactly how I started, and that's what led me to the technology, the actual components that they're using to make this stuff. You can probably go and buy it if you had the right connections. But they supply all these militaries with this stuff. So it's working like this. It's using scalar interferometry, and it's the same thing that your brain is doing. It's the same thing that my neodymium magnet is doing. It's all about focusing. It's about getting to that 0 point and locking into it. So this comes from Montauk. This was the radar dish that they had, and they were using supposedly in the early 1980s. So when they were using this, they were using human subjects and trying to unlock the mind of man and figure out the potentials and what they could do with it, basically. So they were beaming this thing at the subjects and they were frying them out. But they figured out when they flipped the radar back the other way and turned it all the way around that the dish would actually then start amplifying the mind. And that's what they learned back in the early 80s from Montauk. And Tom Bearden goes into a little bit of this stuff where he talks about Preston Nichols, one of the writers of this book. He's talking about this whole thing with when you get to 1,000 Tesla, he says you bend space-time. So this whole thing works like this. Okay. Tom Bearden says that all you need to do is you need 2 projectors or 2 modified radar antenna. And that's immediately when I started thinking about those 2 AWACS. You need 2 projectors, 2 modified radar antenna, and we intersect them at a distance. We can produce energy at a distance. You can modify ordinary radars to do that. So that's what I'm talking about is they make all these components and you can see them on the internet. So he says you have to dump the energy or you'll burn out the projector. So this is exactly what happened to Mike Merkham, Madman Mike Merkham from Art Bell, the time traveler dude. He burnt out his laser when he was creating these interactions with this plasma. He had this Jacob's ladder, and that's how he was starting the arc. So he says Bearden's talking about 3-dimensional interferometry, and some of it uses multiple frequencies. So you can make electromagnetic balls of energy just like that. So that's the quote from Tom Bearden. That's exactly what you see happening with the orbs flying around MH370, and then they pulse while they're rotating counterclockwise. They keep pulsing, and then they switch their rotation because that gives it a break, and then they reorient and go back into counter rotation, and then you see the zap because they created this differential when they stopped their rotation and went back the other way. So Pete Peterson gets into this whole thing too. So he says if you fire 2 pulses in the high potential mode, you get an electromagnetic explosion at a distance. So that would be the opposite of what you see in MH370. Here he says when you fire it in low potential mode, you get a cold explosion at a distance, and that's the endothermic event that you see in MH370. So then he's talking about all this stuff with what the Russians were doing with this woodpecker signal that they were putting out over the United States, and how they actually changed our jet stream with it, or so he says. He's talking about pump 4-way mixing, its interferometry, using time reversed waves. And this is the next big clue that Tom Bearden gave us that I don't think a lot of people even picked up on. We're going to get into it here, but he tells us exactly what a TR3B is. A TR3B is the black triangles that the United States government supposedly has. So he said a lot of stuff in these videos, and it took me a while to put all this together. So he's talking about this whole deal with the time reversed wave. It's a scalar EMP pulse that does not interact with the outside of the atom, but directly with the nucleus. And it is absorbed there. This raises the nucleus to an excited state. If the nucleus can't withstand this increase in potential energy, it directly fissions. And that's exactly what you've seen when you saw the event in September in 2001 with the towers. The thing fissioned just like hitting it with a welder and a welding rod. Okay, the tower is grounded into the earth, and you've seen it get zapped, and you've seen direct fission being created. That's why the pile was still emitting molten metal long after the event happened, and why it stayed hot for so long, because that's what happened in the process. And they said it literally created this huge meteorite looking thing of melted steel and concrete in this big chunk. So that's the byproduct of this system. So it directly fissions. If it withstands, it quickly decreases and emits transverse waves. So this whole thing has some serious impact on what it can do. So he says the large transverse wave interferometry weapons, such as the Russian woodpecker, first produced large power electromagnetic standing waves by continuously transmitting into the carrier beam a normal electromagnetic wave and its phase conjugate. These two beams are 180 degrees out of phase in time dimension, but not in the space dimension, and are modulated or locked together to produce a standing zero electric. So that means what they would say is that there's no electric lines of force that are attached to an object. So then it's free of time space is what they would say. So Tom Bearden said X marks the spot. So it's doing the same exact thing that my neodymium magnet's doing here. It's just a focusing device. It's no different than what a planjet is to a Ouija board. It's just a focusing device. So when you do a little play on words with the planjet thing, you can sound out stuff and do this thing with phonetics, and you can get like other words from it just by sounding it out. So you can get from planjet, you can get a plan jet, like MH370. They had a plan with a jet. Or you can get a plane and a jet. Or it kind of sounds like the name Jeanette. Or Janet plane. The Janet plane is the plane that takes all the workers to Area 51 from McCarran in Las Vegas. So, this whole thing is pretty in depth because there's a lot of this hidden stuff that's just in plain sight, and they're using wordplay, they're using numbers and symbols. Well, you got to be able to pick them up. So, this thing's just working on the magnetic, the dielectric, and then the plane of inertia in between. And that's how everything's working. So once again, thanks to Tom Bearden for letting me find AU gold. So this whole thing is very interesting because this is what got me thinking with all these numbers and stuff is, there's all these frequency ranges that all these companies you're gonna see are using that it's just complete directly in your face. Just like with all that stuff in my other video I show with the metals that they put out, with the whole thing where it looks like it's a search for Amelia Earhart and all this stuff. And so what's going on here is Bearden is saying, he's talking about when they're setting up all this scalar stuff over the United States with the Russian woodpecker. So this is how I think that the orbs were actually formed. I don't know if they were formed by the AWACS or by satellites, but I know definitely as an advantage, you would want to use the AWACS in order to do the focusing of the beams for the interferometry, because you'd want something as close in the local area as possible. You wouldn't want to be doing that from a satellite. It just makes more sense to me. So Tom Bearden's talking about when you form these cloud patterns, you get signatures in the clouds. Well, that's exactly what my concrete pyramids are doing, and that's why the Air Force is so interested in my spot here. So he says you get a droplet of water that is formed around a dust particle or ice if it's cold enough. And this is how you start building the orbs, I believe, is it makes a little transistor or a diode. So when that's formed, they build their own E field, and then these things line up, and what you get is a ring, almost a complete ring. It's about 2/3 of a ring. He says of clouds, but it can be, like I said, these plasma balls. So, and then he's talking about the geometry drawn around the peak where the energy is manipulated. Same thing with my pyramids. All the energy is being focused right at the tip. So, and then he says, he's talking about directly weigh about 10 or 15 miles. And that's very interesting because that lines up with about where I think that these AWACS probably would have been sitting, because they would have been out of the target area ways. So, okay, here we're going to get into the TR3B stuff on the stuff that Tom talks about without really talking about it. He put it out there for everybody to figure out, and I don't know if too many people caught it but me, but here it goes. TR3B, supposedly the craft that the United States has. They've been seen all over, especially in the late 80s, early 90s. It's just a black triangle or whatever. So he tells us exactly how they work right here. TR3B, and this is how they kind of put it out without really putting it out. So TR3B stands for the way it works, time reversed wave. And then the B stands for the B field, just like Bob Lazar told us from Area 51. But here's how they think that they're slick and they hit it. So the TR3 is just the TR with the wave flipped like a 3. So that could be like a W. So it's all in plain sight, and the stuff that Bearden said pertains directly to all my stuff that I've been doing with my pyramids in the clouds too. So another thing that Tom Bearden brings up is the Delta T. And this is the only one in existence in the world that I know of, or anybody that's seen my videos if they built one, but this is the first. This is a Delta T shape, like the antennas that are out there, but this thing shows you the conjugate geometry of the universe when rotated, and when it goes into spin, this is where you get the whole action, because you can see the toroid, the magnetic, and then you can see the hyperboloid, the hourglass of the dielectric or counter space, and then you got the equator or plane of inertia in between, because everything's triplicate. So that's why it's called the Delta T. And then you got the whole deal with TriStar. TriStar pictures their symbol and all that stuff. So, here's the quote, or whatever the French father was talking about. This guy named Diego. He was told by an intelligence source, Mr. B, that the Americans know exactly what happened to the plane, and that there were 2 AWACS spy radar planes in the area. So that just always stood out like crazy to me. And that's what I believe is what was used to do the focusing, was those 2 AWACS. So in my previous video where I go into this whole Pink Floyd thing and the whole connection with me and what's going on, you see this, that Pink Floyd was under the Columbia label and the Harvest label. So it's got big meaning because everything's connected. So here's what Thomas Bearden is talking about here, is that he says to make anti-gravity, all you need to do is make a pump phase conjugate mirror at 100 to 400 hertz, which with the numbers, MH370. The 370 would be right in that range, which is pretty wild too. So he says that you take an over the horizon signal, and it goes back up to where it bounced back from the ionosphere, and then that's how we track a rising rocket using interferometry radar. So that's how this whole thing is working. But they might be using a ground base and satellites and the AWACS in this whole system. I just don't know fully how they're doing it. So this whole thing's giving me a pretty good clue though, because when he says this, he says that they were doing these scalar beams at 3 foot in the lab and 15,000 miles in the field. So 15,000 miles in the field with a radar. But you wouldn't want to do that. In this case, you would want something as close to your target as possible. You wouldn't want to do it at as much distance as possible. You want to be as close, and that's what I'm talking about with these AWACS. So all it takes to build a scalar radar is a plumbing section, a waveguide, and a switch to throw. 3 things. That's all you need. So when he's talking about a waveguide, all you need to know is a waveguide is just like an antenna. And from that statement right there, Tom Bearden led me to the actual technology itself and the components on the internet. It's all in plain sight, and that's exactly what the letter to Ashton Forbes was saying to do, was to find the tech. And it's literally called AU technology. So Tom Bearden let me find AU gold. So thanks once again, Tom Bearden. So what he says is, all you need to do is get a plumbing section, a waveguide, and a switch, and then you got a scalar beam, not a normal radar beam. Okay, so then you interfere 2 scalar beams and you're responding. Then you create a time reverse wave in each beam from the 2 radars in response to some signal, either passively received or reflected light from over the horizon radar from a distant target. This is key. And this is how the orbs are working. So you can put a 6-inch or a 3-inch ball of light inside the target at 15,000 miles. That's precisely how I believe this whole thing is working. The orbs could be formed off the ocean or the clouds, because they're creating these transistors or diodes, and that's how I believe that this whole thing is working. So I also find this part very interesting too, because when you think about this whole wordplay and how the videos came about, and what I'm doing with my whole neodymium magnetic propulsion system stuff, among other things, and what I'm talking about with all this Neo in the Matrix stuff, you look at these words here, okay, the videos were on YouTube, and they were supposedly from the source called Regicide Anon. Well, Regicide Anon translates to King Killer. Okay? Well, I started looking at that word, and then I just started flipping these words here. So from King Killer, you would flip it, and then you would get Killer King. Well, the divine counterpart to that would be a queen. So Killer King would go to Killer Queen, and then Killer King would go to Queen Killer. So I started thinking about this whole thing for some reason, probably about a month ago, and it was with the Freddie Mercury Queen song, which they also call Killer Queen, where he says she's a killer queen, not bad agility, dynamite with a laser beam, guaranteed to blow your mind. And that just seems super, super fitting with this whole thing and the zap with MH370, the laser beam stuff, because that's how they're getting this whole thing to happen too. And the focusing. So, like I said, it all comes back to focusing and having a focusing device or being able to focus your mind, because it's the same thing. So, okay, here's what Tom Bearden is talking about. He's just saying that if you build up all that energy and you don't dump it, it's gonna basically feed back and burn out your system. And that's what Mike Workham found out when he was trying to take a regular CD player laser and get this Jacob's ladder started. So, okay, here's the thing where Tom Bearden's talking about 1,000 Tesla will bend space time. But that's a misnomer too, because you can't bend space and you can't bend time, because space doesn't have any properties and time is just a measure. It only exists conventionally. We just think of it as something, just like we think of space as something, but it's nothing. So, and this gets into this whole thing with what Pete Peterson was talking about on this Project Camelot interview that Kerry Cassidy is asking him about all this stuff. And he's talking about working on the Viking lander, and it's got this thing called a fourth program computer. He worked for North American Rockwell, and all this stuff just was really fitting with what he's talking about. So he's talking about this whole thing, and this is how I believe that the orbs, when they're circling the plane and then they flip their rotation, this is exactly what I think happened. So he's talking about taking a wine glass and then playing a violin. He says if you play up the scale, you'll hear the wine glass vibrating. If you keep playing and then you stop suddenly, he says, and then you play the note that you hear exactly, the glass will break. So that's what I believe is happening with the orbs. They're creating that same exact effect. So when they're doing that change in orientation, they're just giving it a differential. They're throwing everything back the other way. So that's what I believe is happening here. One second. So here's Tom Bearden. This is from a series of lectures that he was given from the 80s. It's pretty funny because basically Ashton Forbes' investigation kind of started out with Tom Bearden and stuff Dave Rossi was telling him, and then it kind of circled all back to the stuff that come from Tom Bearden because I guess Dave Rossi was mentored by Tom Bearden. So this is kind of what happened with my stuff too, because when I got into all this free energy stuff really heavy back in about 2004, I started downloading all these schematics and stuff and all these blueprints that were put out by John Bandini and all his over Unity stuff. And John Bandini was using a lot of Tom Bearden stuff along with all Tesla stuff. So this is what happened with me. Back in 1997, my aunt, I'm pretty sure it was my aunt, who gave me this book as a graduation gift. I'd never picked it up and read it until 2004. This book, Mega Brain, is super powerful. If you want to read it, this is what helped me do many things, especially in the aspect of magic. So this book teaches you how to take both hemispheres of your brain and make them one. It's called a technique called hemisync. So hemisync is just taking both hemispheres and being able to focus them and become one. So that's how scalar interferometry works. You see how when you have two at this angle, you see the cross interference pattern that it creates. That's what's going on, and that's where the magic is happening. So it's how the whole thing is working. It's zero pointing everything out. It's focusing, and then it's having an effect at a distance, and that's all that magic is. If you can focus hard enough on what you want to do, you'll achieve exactly what you set out to try and do. So here's what Bearden is showing. He's showing these scalar beams crossing, and then you see that diamond. Well, here's the diamond. That's where the magic happens. It's zero pointing out the system. So this is why I'm saying that I think those two AWACS are so important in the MH370 disappearance, because it's so easy to do. Like Tom Bearden says, all you do is take a regular radar, change 3 things on it, and then you got a scalar radar that shoots a scalar beam. Because when you're just dealing with regular radar, it's slow because it's light speed. It's 186,000 miles per second. So when you're dealing with a scalar radar, then it's faster than light. So that's how it's got to be done. You'd want those AWACSs as close to that target as you could possibly get them. Because if other people are out there too, they would have the equipment to detect anything that's anomalous. So here's Bearden's picture showing what it can do at a distance. It could bust apart asteroids or planets or whatever. So here's how it's working. It's just got your normal sine wave here, but then it's got another one that's 180 degrees out of phase with it. So your full phase would be a 360-degree circle, but you're only using a half of it. And then you're seeing where the interference is being created. So here's this video real quick. Bearden toroid plasma generator. This is how I think that these orbs are working. Is something like this. So you're seeing this thing fire up, and create that rain. That's what I believe is happening with the orbs and how they're being created, like Tom Bearden is talking about. So this is how I'm pretty sure that they're doing it with these AWACS. And these scalar beams. It's like Tom Bearden was talking about. You would get this whole thing going by either using the water from the ocean or from a cloud, and you would cause that whole action to form where it's making a small diode or a transistor, and then you just keep building it. So this is why I say that these AWACS systems are so important to look at in this whole thing. An airborne early warning and control. So that's what it stands for. It's an airborne radar early warning system designed to detect aircraft, ships, vehicles, missiles, and other incoming projectiles at long range, as well as performing command and control of the battle space and aerial engagements by informing and directing friendly fighter and attack aircraft. Okay, so they also carry out aerial surveillance over ground and maritime targets. They frequently perform battle management, command and control. When used at altitude, the radar systems on the AWACS aircrafts allow the operator to detect, track, and prioritize targets and identify friendly aircraft from hostile ones in real time and from much further away than ground-based radar. So that's important. So let's read that again. Track and prioritize targets and identify friendly aircraft from hostile ones in real time and from much further away than ground-based radars. So, like ground-based radars, the AWACS systems can be detected and targeted by opposing forces. But due to aircraft mobility and extended sensor range, they are much less vulnerable to counterattack than ground systems. So that's why I'm telling you, they had to be using something like this. And here you see the dish on top. That's a Royal Air Force Boeing E3 Century. So this is more likely something what they were using. So the AWACS are used for both defensive and offensive operations. So they're telling you right there, it's an offensive deal too. Serves the Air Force in the same role as what the Combat Information Center is to a naval warship. So that's why I'm saying you would use something like that, because you would have all the gear that you would need to do exactly this whole thing. So useful and advantages. Useful, okay, so the advantages is to have an aircraft operating at a high altitude, that some navies also operate aircraft for their warships at sea. So in the case of the United States Navy, Northrop Grumman E-2 Hawkeyes is what they got this stuff on. And was used for earlier similar aircraft used in less demanding radar picket roles, such as, okay, so these other aircraft. So they emphasize the command and control capabilities that may not be present on smaller or simple radar picket aircraft. AWACS is the name, okay, AWACS. AWACS is the name of the specific system installed on the E3 and the Japanese Boeing E767, the AWACS airframe, but is often used as a general synonym for AWACS. So the modern AWACS system can detect an aircraft from up to 220 nautical miles away, well out of range of most surface-to-air missiles. One AWACS aircraft flying at 9,000 meters, 30,000 feet, can cover an area of 120,000 square miles. 3 such aircraft in overlapping orbit can cover the whole of Central Europe. AWACS systems indicate close and far proximity range on threats and targets, help extend the range of their sensors, and make offensive aircraft harder to track by avoiding the need for them to keep their own radar active, which enemy can detect. In order to detect threats, the system also communicates with friendly aircraft, vectoring fighters towards hostile aircraft, or any flying unidentified object, like a UFO or an orb. Communicate with friendly aircraft, vectoring fighter. Okay, so then it just repeats this whole thing, because that's what you get when you go on to Wikipedia, where I pulled all this. So that's a key, because they help extend their sensor range, and they make offensive aircraft more difficult to track, since they no longer need to keep their own radar active, which can be detected by the enemy. Super key. So here's some of their current systems. Many countries have developed their own AWACS systems, although the Boeing, the Century, and the Northrop Grumman Hawkeye are the most common worldwide. This is where it gets really interesting. Boeing produces a specific system with a rotor dome rotating radar dome that incorporates the Westinghouse, or formerly Westinghouse and Tesla, now Northrop Grumman radar. It's mounted on a Century Boeing 707, or more recently 767, and that's what Japan uses in their deal. So they first use a pulse Doppler radar, which is super important too, because when you pulse all this stuff, that's when it's got its effects going, and then you can reach out and touch stuff. So the AWACS features a 3-dimensional radar that measures azimuth range, elevation, and then simultaneously the unit installed upon the E767 has superior surveillance capability over water compared to the AN/APY1 system used on the earlier A3 models. So here they're showing you some of the stuff that uses it. So the latest version uses this, and has been speculated to be capable of detecting fighter-sized stealth aircraft, which are typically optimized against high frequency, and then it goes into the bands. So historically, the UHF radars had resolution and detection issues that made them ineffective for accurately targeting and fire control. Northrop Grumman, Lockheed claim that their stuff has solved these shortcomings, and the APY9, using advanced electronic scanning and high digital computer powering, computer power, via space-time adaptive processing. And this is super, 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 super important here, because this is what exactly what Pete Peterson is talking about in that interview with Kerry Cassidy. He's talking about how when he was working on it, they're still building all these chips from the 70s, and they're putting out more of these per month than the Intel chips that are mostly in our computers today. So it's all about this whole thing with this terrain modeling system and how you need super high speed to do the analog. So when all this stuff comes together, you can see how it's working. So here they're showing you what one of them looked like that the Royal Air Force uses. Here's a Brazilian one. So here they say that the Boeing E-3 Sentry is an American airborne early warning and control aircraft developed by Boeing. They're commonly known as AWACS. It's derived from a Boeing 707. Provides all-weather surveillance, command, control, and communications, and it's used by the United States Air Force, NATO, French. Okay, so the E-3 has a distinctive, this is key, distinctive rotating radar dome above the fuselage, and this thing was produced in 1992, or production ended, in 1992 after 68 had been built. So that's what they're saying that you want, is this rotating radar dome. And there's a good picture of it. So here's some of the specs on this thing. So the E-3 Sentry airframe is a modified Boeing 707 320B advanced model. The modifications include a rotating radar dome, which is called the rotodome, uprated hydraulics, a single point ground refueling, air refueling, a bailout tunnel chute, second bailout chute, and this is key too, because look, these things got they don't have to be refueled until 8 hours of flying time, which is key because the whole deal with the MH370. So this is kind of hard to read, so I'm gonna just read it. So when deployed, the E-3 monitors an assigned area of the battlefield and provides information for commanders of all air operation to gain and maintain control of the battle, which, while as a defense asset, they can detect, identify, and track airborne enemy forces far from the boundaries of the United States. In support of air-to-ground operations, the E-3 can provide direct information needed for interception, reconnaissance, and up-close support of friendly ground forces. In the avionics, the unpressurized rotodome is 30 foot in diameter, 6 foot thick, and is 11 foot above the fuselage. So they're using this thing as a passively electronically scanned array radar system to provide intelligence from the Earth's surface up to the stratosphere over land and water. Other major subsystems are navigation, communications, and computers. 14 consoles display computer process data in graphic and tabular format on screens. Its operators perform surveillance, identification, weapons control, battle management, and communications functions. The data may be forwarded in real time to any major command and control center in rear areas of or aboard ships. In times of crisis, the data may also be forwarded to the National Command Authority in the United States or Aircraft Carrier Task Force. This is key here. Electrical generators mounted on each of the E3's 4 engines provide 1 megawatt of electrical power, which is huge, required by the aircraft for its radars and electronics. Then it's got a pulse Doppler radar that's got a range of 250 miles. So, range of 250 miles for low flying targets at its operational altitude, and a pulse radar has a range of 400 miles for aircraft flying at medium to high altitude. The radar, combined with secondary surveillance radar and electronic support measures, provide look-down capabilities. This is important to detect, identify, and track low-flying aircraft while eliminating ground clutter returns. This is where it's going to get into the whole thing with the terrain modeler and how it ties into the whole terrain modeling system that Pete Peterson was talking about, and that all these other military systems are using. So between 1987, okay, these are the upgrades. And here's what it looks like inside one of these things. You can see their whole bank of systems right there. Between 1987 and 2001, the United States E3s were upgraded under the Block 3035 modification program. The enhancements include the installation of ESM and electronic surveillance capability for both active and passive means of detection, installation of the Joint Tactical Information Distribution System, which provides rapid and secure communications for transmitting information, including target positions and identification data to other friendly platforms. GPS, this is key. Global positioning system capability was added. Onboard computers were overhauled to accommodate the JTIDS Link 16, the new EMS system, and allow for further enhancements. And this just goes into more of their stuff. So all this stuff was retrofitted in like December 2000. So you're seeing how all this stuff was going and being put in place before everything happened with MH370. So this is really key here, because we get into this whole thing with this Dragon thing. In 2009, United States Air Force, in cooperation with NATO, entered into a major flight deck avionics modernization program in order to maintain compliance with worldwide airspace mandates. The program, called Dragon, for DMS replacement of avionics for global operation and navigation, was awarded to Boeing and Rockwell Collins in 2010, and that's exactly who Pete Peterson said he worked for, was Rockwell. And most of the avionics was replaced with more modern digital equipment from Rockwell. So that just totally confirms this whole deal. And here's the deal with the terrain awareness. So in 2000, drawings on their Flight 2 flight management system, almost all the avionics were replaced with more modern digital equipment from Rockwell Collins. The main upgrades include a digital audio distribution system, Mode 5 ADS-B transponder, an IMMERSAT, which is key to all the MH370 stuff, IMMERSAT, and VDL data links, and this is key, a terrain awareness and warning system, TAWS. The centerpiece flight deck hardware consists of 5, 6 by 8 colored graphics displays. Okay, and the other key thing is this autopilot, all with this Dragon. So with all that, that's why I'm saying that this whole deal is being done, I believe, with the use of these AWACS, with their radars modified to become scalar radars. And that's just what it's got to be, because that's what Tom Bearden has been talking about this whole time with all this stuff. So you can go look up all this stuff for yourself if you want to go into more depth, but that's what I found. In the next video, I would like to go into some more Tom Bearden stuff in relation to how he helped me find the actual technology that the letter to Ashton Forbes was talking about. So stay with me. If you haven't seen my other stuff, please check it out. Thanks for watching.